Today on the Crit House, we discuss the work of Vivian Maier. During her lifetime, Vivian Maier and her photographs were unknown and unpublished to the outside world. It was only after her death that she's been recognized by many, if not universally, as one of the great photographers. Her images capture people on the street and architecture in Chicago, New York, and other cities. Throughout her life, she worked as a nanny and other household positions, taking pictures while working and during her time off. There seems to be little record of how she learned photography, if she went to museums or galleries, looked at images in magazines. It appears that she was entirely self-taught. She certainly didn't have editors, publishers, gallerists, and others giving her input or guiding her work. Her path to fame began in 2007 when a collector acquired some of Maier's photos. At around the same time, others found Maier's prints and negatives. Her photographs were first published online in 2008, but didn't get much attention at first. The following year, 2009, some of her images went viral on Flickr, and it was then that her photos started to garner broad critical acclaim. Since then, her images have been shown internationally. Her life and her work have been documented in several books and documentaries, and despite living a life in photographic isolation, she has become one of the world's most recognized names in photography. One critic has suggested that while she was born in New York, she spent much of her time growing up in France, and that sharpened her visual appreciation for America, similar to Robert Frank. The great Mary Ellen Mark has compared Vivian Maier's work to Helen Levitt, Robert Frank, Lisette Modell, Diane Arbus, and Joel Meyerowitz. The New York Times wrote that her work maintains a distinctive element of calm, a clarity of composition, and a gentleness. Today, on the Crit House, we discuss the work of Vivian Maier. Hey everybody, welcome to the Crit House. I'm Jeff Larson, and we are going in a different direction for this episode. We're calling this Crit House Masters, where we are bringing in people I consider to be masters to talk about other photographic masters. And we are graced today with two fantastic photographers who are with us, Neal Rantoul and Lou Jones. Neal is an artist and an educator. He was the head of the photographic program at Northeastern University for 30 years. He taught at Harvard University, he taught elsewhere, and now he is focusing on making new work and on bringing his earlier work to a national and international audience. And Neal, I have to say, has been a great influence on the Crit House for a while, giving his input. So Neal, it is fantastic to have you here on the Crit House. Thanks for coming.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Lou Jones, also a master in my mind, and I think in a lot of other people's minds as well. He has done it all. His work has evolved from commercial to personal. He has worked for Fortune 500 companies. He has done assignments for Time Life, for National Geographic and Paris Match, amongst others. He has published multiple books, and he is working on, he has been and is working on many long-term projects. And Lou, it really is an honor to have you join us here on the Crit House as well.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So we are talking about Vivian Maier, who we just saw a little information of and some of her images as well. And I know that the two of you coming from your background have some thoughts about that. And I'm gonna start with what really in my mind has always been the biggest question about her and her work. Is she one of the greats? Is she in that pantheon of the masters, or is she something else?
Well, we're certainly being told that she is, aren't we? The whole promotional effort has been to elevate her to a very high level, and her work has gone into very esteemed places and talked about in those kinds of ways. I don't know that we really know. My own personal feeling is that she's up there, but I have no way of knowing whether that's somebody who's going to stay through the test of time, the way we think of some of the other masters that we acknowledge. But the work is significant for sure and worthy of consideration, worthy of being looked at and evaluated, because she was a wonderful photographer. That's very clear.
I think that Neal brings up some very interesting issues. I think that I go off, I'm kind of an outlier in all kinds of parts of photography, but I go off and say that she worked in such isolation. And I don't know a lot about her, but I think that most people will, say that's true, that she worked in such isolation, both by design and by circumstance, that she worked in such isolation that we do put her, I love her work. I love a lot of her work, let's put it that way. And that because she's worked in such isolation, that I put her in a category all her own, measuring her against the pantheon of other photographers is complicated, because she comes to us from a completely different, not only, like I said, a lot of it by design, but also she didn't have a lot to say about how we evaluate her photographs. And so I think she belongs in a sort of category, unique category, all her own.
I agree. And I think one of the things that's amazing about her is that everything we can gather about her is this extremely private, introverted character. And yet there she is going out there on the streets and putting her camera right in front of people. It's extraordinary. And I think one of the things that pops out for me is the self-portraits speak to me that she's in the process of discovering herself. What she looks like in a picture becomes important to her, I think. How she fits within the world a little bit too. I think some of the kid pictures are very beautiful. I assume they're some of the kids that she was looking after, some of the portraits of kids. So, but that's a remarkable thing to see. And here's this person who doesn't come from a trained background. And we talk about her working in isolation. I have to make the assumption that she's seeing other work. I think that's her education. I think she's looking at whoever is hot, whoever's showing in Chicago and New York City. I think she must be avid about that, because her pictures look very knowledgeable and very well designed and well thought out. She understands about being close. I mean, she's remarkably close sometimes. So here's this, you talk about her being in a kind of a bubble, and it's very true. And yet what she's able to do is quite extraordinary. You know, one of the technical things is that I think these are almost all the ones that you've chosen, Jeff, are almost all with the Rolly. And it's important to remember that that's a camera that you hold at waist level, like Arbus did, and you look down. And so and it's also quite quiet. There isn't a big mirror going up and down on that camera. So she can be quite unobtrusive, and she can be in the context of looking at something quite private, and she can get at it because she's holding it at her waist. It's not up to her eye.
But so I had a question for the two of you, and this is in part because of this is where I am with my photography right now, with the need to like write about it and to communicate the meaning of your work in some way. And so she never, to my knowledge, never wrote about what her work was. We don't have, I don't, as far as I know, we don't have that in writing. So all of the interpretation is done without her input, without any information from her about what that is. How problematic is that? Or is it?
I think it's a clean slate. You know, in some ways, it sort of starts the interpretation of her work with no bias and no baggage. It's in my career, I've never seen that before.
Again, I come from it at a different level. I think it is clear by design that she was not showing her work to anyone. And so, you know, the fact that she wasn't showing it while she was alive, she probably had no expectation of people seeing it afterward. So we are editing her life's work, which I find very problematic. You know, critics will go in and pick and choose the photographs that we as artists will choose to show the world. And some will be everlasting if we hopefully, and others may be sort of lost. But we're seeing a lot of her work without her influence as to what we see. She was, as I said from the very beginning, she's working in isolation, and that puts her in a completely. I had a teacher in college who said to us as little pipsqueak students, he said that a true artist, now I'm not sure I agree with the interview, but he said a true artist does not need an audience, that a true artist will create strictly for themselves. He said that Michelangelo, who did the Sistine Chapel, am I right about that? Michelangelo did that, would have only been a true artist if he, this is going out on a limb, had painted it and then destroyed it. And we have someone here who's actually come close to doing that, you know, where her work was done completely, seemingly for herself. And I think that us interpreting gets really complex.
There is a purity to that, isn't that? I mean,
yes.
That's right. It's interesting you say that, because so my favorite museum on this earth is in Baltimore, Maryland. It's the American Museum of Visionary Art, where it's untrained artists who create work, and the curators of this place go out and find these. It's all sorts of different art, painting, sculpture, all sorts, you know, and it is some of the most moving work that I have ever seen. And it's people who just do it because that's what's in their soul and they have to get it out. But you're right. I can't think, I mean, I don't know art history and I don't know art that much, but I don't know of anyone who has gone their entire life with no, for doing their work entirely on their own. I mean, even Van Gogh, I mean, they say he was on his own and wasn't recognized, but he got some recognition during his lifetime.
Absolutely. And I think that's why I say this work is not only good in many ways, whether she was influenced by seeing others, but also we have to put that in, even what Neal said, in context. This is done in the 50s. So her scope of who she was looking at was far more limited than we have today. So we have to see her interpreting a lot of the work, if she was voracious in looking at other people's work or not. Whatever she's interpreting, that was a far smaller sphere. So again, seeing her with influence or not, she was really figuring out a lot of things that were well within the context of her time and beyond.
Exhibiting photography, art photography in the 50s and 60s was a very, very limited and restrictive kind of a process. Exactly. There weren't shows all the time. There weren't new books coming out all the time. Robert Frank made The Americans in the mid-50s, but it wasn't as a published book. It wasn't published until later. So even that wasn't accessible to her for most part. So that's important to remember that I cited that she must be seeing work, but like Lou says, I'm sure it was much more limited.
Yeah. Well, so Neal, I mean, you spent a good portion of your career as an educator, and yet this person, Vivian Maier,
unknown.
unknown, without education, came to this quality of work without having the benefit of minds like yours. How does that happen?
Well, that's part of the remarkable part of it, I think, is that um, Lou was alluding to this earlier. I don't think she wants to make pictures. I think she has to make pictures because there's no reward system for her. There's no show it to a gallery or an art to an art director. There's just her making the pictures, and so she's getting enough from it in terms of gratification and rewards that it keeps her going. And presumably her work extends and goes into different areas. And somehow for me, she represents a kind of example. If I had her material when I was teaching photography, I would have put it right up there with Arbus, who I taught a lot with, Gary Winogrand, Harry Callahan, Walker Evans, earlier people, Stieglitz, and so on. I would have used her because of her approach. It's very honest and straightforward. She's face to face a lot of the time. She's very good in the moment with a camera that's not very quick. So there are things she's doing in terms of logistics of making pictures that are quite refined, and she's highly involved. Clearly, this is something that kind of drives her. She must be making pictures as often as she can because they look developed. They look well seen. She understands framing. She understands light and tonalities. These aren't an amateur's pictures at all.
No, I say that I actually think, and this is something I thought of a while ago, that her pictures, this is a sort of art, old school art term, but her pictures are formal.
Yes.
They're deliberate.
Extremely.
And as Neal said, they are well composed. Now, a lot of them are relatively simple, but they are complex compositions inside that simplicity. And as you were saying, she started in the 50s. So how we see in those days her making these, now the portraits are completely different. I see her as having, I don't know, as segmenting her work into 4 or 5 different categories, which we may be able to get to it at some point. But in the majority of them, she is doing something. Okay, let me go. What I used to say, I didn't do much teaching, but I used to say to students, to camera clubs, to people who were asking my advice, don't just take what you see. The thing that's in front of you. 90% of photographers pick up a camera and take what's in front of them. And that's just not important work, except to them. When she is going and taking photographs that are really, really working with the entire frame. Now, again, we are seeing her work as a secondary without her influence is to cropping, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we have to not put too much into the fact that a lot of the work we see are uncropped. So we're seeing how formal, how she is making these pictures. Look at this one exactly. Within it, it's showing within an inch of its life the composition and using all the elements, and yet the picture is much more complex than people just seeing what it is. And I find that is where she excels in and makes her jump up from a good photographer up at least 1 or 2 more levels and in my work. And like I said, I find a lot to be found in her work that I'm hoping I can include in mine.
I just find, as we ramp through her pictures, I can't help but be excited by them. They're such a pleasure to see. There's such a window into that time, and I feel as though I'm being extended and pushed along a little bit by seeing what she's seen, the moments that she's found. Lou knows my work very well. He knows I'm not fast, and so it's intriguing to see something that is on the street or made so knowledgeably and so beautifully, so quickly. So it's one of the things I admire about her. The other thing that Lou mentioned earlier was the idea of the picture not being what's in front of you, but looking around. And I have to draw a story, and that is that as an early 8x10 view camera photographer and a landscape guy, I would drive the car, I would stop the car, I would set up the tripod and set up the camera and get the film holders and put the light meter around my neck and traipse off to what I thought was the picture. And I would inevitably make that picture. It took me a while to learn that after I've done all this setting up, I better look over there and behind me and over there. 9 times out of 10, it was the one around the corner or behind or
Exactly.
180 degrees from that initial shot that was the photograph.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not at the level you guys are at professionally as photographers, but it is one of those things that took me a long time walking the streets to just realize every once in a while you need to turn around and look where you just were from the angle that you're at now, because that's something you passed it by, but you didn't look at it from that angle.
I used to tell 2 things to my students. One was that we're trained observers, and the other is that we're predators, particularly on the street. If we're walking and working this way, it is a predatory act to be after. You're kind of on it. Cartier-Bresson used to talk about that his photographing was a kind of a dance because he was moving so fast very often.
Yeah, there's a short video of him that's very famous of him sort of tiptoeing around up on the street somewhere. It's a beautiful thing to see. It's a little bit like you see when you see Winogrand with video when he's shooting, and yeah, it is a dance. It is a dance. It's true.
My work is street photography, a lot of it, the street photography, and so seeing the instantaneous choices she's making are and we do that as like this, this kind of thing where the background, the people in the background, the people on the sides, the people in the foreground, all, and it's not just, oh, let's take a picture of what I see.
No, it's magic.
This is thought through.
Mm.
Well, that's a question I had for you specifically, Lou, and to some extent to Neal as well. So as a person who does street as well, like, this is an image that tells me a lot about how she shoots. This scene was going on and somehow she found a way of approaching it. She was probably walking around trying to figure out where to position herself, and finally came close and then was waiting for a moment with her camera. But and it seems to me that the benefit of having that slow camera, as opposed to these cameras that pop off, 30 frames a second or whatever it is, that she sat there in almost in a landscape kind of way, waited and waited, and I don't know how long she was there, and maybe I'm completely wrong about how she did this, but it seems like she does this a lot. She will go to a place and wait.
I agree. I say that composition for photography, not painting. We talk about rule of thirds and diagonals and all of that, which is all hundreds of years composition. But photography, we're talking about contemporary composition, and I talk about it as, people have heard me talk about it as weight and weight, WEIGHT and WAIT.
I've never heard that.
What's that?
I've never heard that. I love that. I'm going to ingrain that in my brain.
I invented it, so you should have heard. So weight is how she uses darks and lights, and when she's using black and white. So you're using black and white. How white black may have more weight in the photograph, and we have to balance that off with white to be a photographic composition, because we don't have color. I'm using reds and I'm using certain colors and they have more weight or less weight compositionally, and that's where the composition and the weight, W-A-I-T, is we wait 125th of a second to the things just right. We wait 5 minutes until somebody walks into the picture. We wait a week until the snow clears. We wait a season until the leaves come into the way we want. We wait, and that's all happening with composition. That's what composition is in photography, not painting, all of that. We can create a photograph out of our mind with painting, but waiting for the right moment. You know, it's not just Bresson's, what did he call it?
Decisive moment.
Decisive moment. It has to do with these other kinds of waiting for something to happen that may take months. And so she is very, like you said, she's waiting for when the swimming picture, this picture of the child with the hand makes the photograph, the whole thing, waiting for that child to maybe even reach out to her, and recognizing that and understanding it and making that the compositional. You see that she uses, if you think about it, she's using a square format a lot, and she's using the subjects often right in the center, which in the camera clubs, that's considered a no-no.
Sure.
And makes great photographs even with that. So she's using a lot of different multiple levels.
So let me go off of what Lou said, because it's so relevant. Lou uses weight. I use the idea of timing. And if you think about how she's there in front of that kid with the hand up against the glass of the car, and she's waiting, as Lou says. She's got a device in her hands that takes 12 pictures. 12 pictures is nothing these days, but she can't afford to crank off one after the other, after the other, after the other. What she's doing is she's waiting, and she's thinking maybe something could be happening here. This kid is back behind that glass, and there's raindrops on the glass, and then bang, it happens, and she's right there with that click. And that's part of the remarkable thing that she's doing. She's doing it with a device that's, again, not easy. So it's part of what I admire about her, is her ability to wait, or her sense of timing is so wonderful. And presumably there's 11 other frames, or there's many other frames that didn't quite click. And here we are relying upon who is choosing to edit this picture and show it to us. I get that.
Yes.
But still, it's she made it, and it's there, and we're allowed now to see it. I feel privileged to see it.
You know, one thing we don't hear a lot, and maybe this is because I don't know that much about her, but so this image, I mean, she does some pretty impressive portraits too.
She does. Yeah, no, they're beautiful. I mean, look at this, the shape of this boy's body, and how he fits in that frame, and how the tonalities are rendered on the screen. How beautiful that background is as a background for the incredible clarity of him, and this wonderful moment of he's looking right at her. He's giving her a little attitude, but she's not wavering. She's not faltering. You know, she's right there, and she gets it.
Yeah.
And you know, the square is a unique design tool. It's very strange in photography that there is this square, because things do tend to get centered, and there's no horizon that goes to the right far or to the left far, or vertical that goes up or down. There's just the square. So things get kind of compacted and related to each other in kind of different ways. The image is kind of ending before it actually gets started in some ways on its edges. And so that's unusual, and she's very effective with it. Lou says she's using the center, and she is, which is this classic rule breaking, but also she's a little bit off a little bit. So I use the square a lot through my career, and I try to play that game of knowing the whole frame and putting things a little bit out of whack or a little bit off kilter. I think she does that sometimes too.
Let's look at some specific images. So yeah. This one to me is it's just lovely. It's very reminiscent for me of Robert Frank. You know, it's got the motion. I don't see a lot of her images that are at night. But of all the images that I've seen of hers, this is the one that sticks in my mind as being just lyrical and of a time and with an emotional element. It's this one moves me. Many of them do, but
some sort of beautiful story. You know, where does she come from? What is she going to? Is she come from a dance or a ball or something? And she's by herself, which is so odd. And yeah, you're right. We don't see a lot of pictures from her at night, and yet when we do, it's really good. This can't be sharp, you know, because the shutter speed has to be so slow in order to get the picture, and yet it's better because it isn't sharp.
But I think of how she took this, you know. So I mean, we talk about her like waiting. She's not waiting for this unless she's, you know, she saw something and saw her coming along and recognized the shot and came and brought it along. But this wasn't I can't imagine this is something where she was expecting and waiting for this shot to be taking place.
I beg to differ. Some of the photographers, probably not as noteworthy as some of the people we're talking about, but that I have paid attention to, have told me about their ability to anticipate, and people who can see photographs developing. And so my thought when I see this is that she saw this person walking by her, walking into the frame, and anticipated from that component and made the photograph and understood that. One of the things that, again, about composition, and that she's very, I don't think it's a failing. I think that, again, it's a whole nother discussion, but that she photographs often she has photographs from behind people, seeing their backs. There's a lot of photography that she has that she's shooting the back, which is also not really on the camera club's list of high scorers.
Approved methods, right.
Yeah. And so she's doing something. Now, there's a component of shooting people from behind that points up their fear of that confrontation that street photographers often have with their subjects.
Yes.
And that one of the things that I get lots of people, I had a conversation today, literally, I couldn't believe the coincidence. Somebody called me on the phone, long distance, to talk about street photography. This is somebody older. He's been working in IT for years, and he wanted to talk about what is street photography and how can I become a better street photographer, and and that kind of thing. And the fact that she's being able to make a lot of wonderful photographs confronting people face to face. You talk about the portraiture, but also that fear of not confronting or seeing this photograph and making a wonderful photograph behind someone.
You do often hear street
agree.
photography referred to as the art of taking pictures of people's backs.
Oh, I've never heard that. I don't tend to do that. So
I know
yeah.
you don't. And I
That's
think
another
it's,
thing I would talk to students about is, you know, they always wanted to be on the street and they always wanted to make pictures of people. And then they always would either try to be too far away or
Yes.
photograph
Yes.
somebody with a longer lens, which
That's
was
right.
kind of cheating. And then I saw a lot of pictures of people's backs because they were too scared to be at their fronts.
Exactly.
The other thing about the picture of somebody from behind is that I always felt as though we started to see the scene in front of the person that's walking in this case through their eyes, because we're only looking over their shoulders. Not so much in this one because there isn't that much behind her, but in a lot of things where you see people photographed from behind, I feel like we're vicariously kind of seeing the world through them a little bit as a tactic.
That's interesting. Yep.
I mean, it's such an odd, wonderful picture. My first impression was that the guy looks like Alfred Hitchcock.
yes, he does.
I'm thinking of that as, oh, this is one of those, this is a scene from his movie or something. But I go to Martha's Vineyard a lot. I'm on that ferry a lot, back and forth, and I photograph on that ferry. And people on a ferry is pretty unusual. They're kind of stuck, right? So you can get at them, and then the scene is almost always like this with open ocean. So the background itself is very conducive, right, for making pictures. But he's looking up to the upper left. We don't know, right? And yet the bird is on the upper right. And then she's standing there kind of looking straight ahead. That's just unusual.
That has a lot to do with weight. You know, when I'm talking about weight, WEIGHT.
Yep. Yep.
In that we're having the couple dark in the lower, and then, like you said, he's looking to this empty sky. So there's more white, but the black balances the white just, and then he's looking to the empty sky, and the thing that's brings our attention that she sees that she is the bird in the far upper right. So we're getting these cross-purposed, complex,
or being thrown around, aren't we? Right.
Huh?
It's very clever.
That's right. Exactly.
The other thing is that we haven't really addressed this, but these are black and white pictures. And at a time when black and white was the medium, this wasn't an exception. Or she didn't mostly make a choice about black and white versus color. Her choice was black and white, and the medium that she worked in was black and white. Right. And we're seeing her, I know the printing is more modern, but we're seeing her understanding and sympathy and love for this black and white medium. And look at this guy's suit. It's just a total inky black. That's right. Right. And so I just wanted to sit in passing and mention that this is a black and white world for her.
I know that a lot of people think, you know, and my first introduction to her was through the portraits and her self-portraits. Her portraits, that's how years ago when I first, and sort of, that was my introduction. And I have a very mixed feeling about self-portraits and especially these, but she makes complex reflections, and she's not doing always self-portraits. She's using herself as the most available model to create complex pictures. And the complexity of her being in them is just part of the genius of the photographs.
You know, did some of those earlier in his career was Friedlander.
I was just going to say that. I wonder if she saw any of his work.
Wonderful things where you, because of his own shadow in the window, you're seeing through into something.
That's right.
Back in the back of the room or the diner or wherever he was shooting, and then of course you're seeing the reflection of the street, and then him in that. So all of a sudden, I mean, photography is kind of restrictive sometimes because it only goes in one direction. Here we're going in absolutely all kinds of directions. We're going forward. We're also going backwards.
That's right. That's right. And she's making a real, whew, just several of her photographs. Now there's some that are just, there's someone, a critic, I think it was a British critic, was saying that he wasn't really crazy about her reflections because it just became, where am I? You know, and I was like, oh
no,
no,
got that one wrong, right?
Yeah.
I thought so.
Those critics, huh?
Yeah.
Well, one of my favorite parts about this particular image is when you look down here, the legs of the two women are both in the shadow of her body. It's just so perfectly placed.
That's right.
Right.
You know, we talk a little bit about, you know, she's done portraits, but she has this way of finding just moments that on the street, and there are a number of different images that could illustrate that. But this particular one, for me, is just, you know,
Pain.
I don't know what happened here, but it's just look at the emotion on that child's face.
He's falling apart, this kid.
Yeah, and the cigarette smoke from his mother, which is just, you know, 6 inches from his face, you know, crossing over his eye, and
she must be having Adam, you know, or something. Yeah, I mean, your heart goes out to this poor kid. Whatever he's done, did he deserve that lashing that she's giving him? You know?
Yeah, I can only. I mean, I remember that
I
face
can relate.
on me as a child.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Like I screwed up again.
But just the ability to, you know, I mean, again, Lou, you're a street photographer. I do street work as well. The ability to find a moment as powerful like this on the street. You know, I mean, you walk around all day long and you just see people going about doing their business, and you don't have a lot of emotion on the street. But look at that, the timing and the composition and the moment and the powerful. You know, that's a face you don't see in photography very often.
You know, this thing of street photography that so many people aspire to be good at is the most difficult of things to do. To find this symphony or this kind of choreography on the street like this, with people just moving about and just having their day, is a remarkable skill. And anybody that does it that I've ever met shoots huge quantity to get to their point. You know,
Thousands.
It's the kind of thing where you have to shoot everything. And you talk to people that do this a lot and we're very good at it. And a couple of contemporaries come to mind, but it's just a remarkable ability. And for me, much harder than almost anything to be successful at.
The fellow that talked to me this afternoon about, I said, you know, you have to be very, very careful that a lot of photographers, especially early on students and things like even the camera club photographers who, you know, aspire to street photography will say, I'm going to put a 200 millimeter lens on my camera and go out and shoot.
No.
And that's fine if you can figure out how to do that and do it well, because I say that every lens has its own personality. So you add a tremendous amount of personality. Non-photographers don't see it, don't understand it, but you add a tremendous amount to your photographs depending upon which lens you do. But in street photography, a lot of that intimacy is lost. And so although if you figure out how to do it, great artists will exceed no matter what the restrictions are. But a lot of the photographers I like are working in relatively close with a shorter lens and things like that. And like you said, she's probably Neal, what's the focal length of the lens?
80 millimeter. I'm just going to bring that up. So in a twin lens Rolleiflex, there were two of them. There was an 80, which is a normal, what we think of as being normal, like a 50 on a 35 millimeter camera. And then there was a 50 or 55 that was much more rare and more expensive. And I don't see any evidence that she's working with that. I think she's always working with that 80. So
gotcha.
She's pretty
That's
close.
what I thought.
That's
what I thought.
She looks like she's no more than 4 or 5 feet away from
I think that's
moment.
right. And standing there with this camera at her waist, like Lou says, waiting, You know, I mean, my God, right? And then she gets this moment where the kid's being slammed, right?
Poor kid.
I mean, it's a very unusual picture. And to me, it strikes me, and here we are in the 50s or maybe the 60s. It looks like such cutting edge contemporary architecture and very knife edge and very sharp, and speaks all about modernism and progressive things moving forward. There's nothing ancient here at all. And then she gets this wonderful, you know, kind of a picture in a picture, whereas this overall structure is very powerful. But then he's standing there with a hose watering it. It looks like what we've got is turf, because they've just rolled the grass down. It's not embedded in the soil yet. It's been rolled on top. And that's a fairly modern thing to do. And then the scale of things is so twisted. Look at the size of the characters on the right by the edge of the water. They're tiny. So there's a scale thing that's happening that's quite wonderful. And one of the things I always loved about photography was that you could play with scale by the way you position things and put them in relative distance and so on. It's just an unusual picture, and unusual for her. I don't think we have anything quite like it. And yet there she is, and she's making something that
yes,
works.
she uses I do think that like I said, there were 4 or 5 category segments that I think, and one of the things I do see in some of her work, at least the work that we're seeing other people editing for us to see, is she's using these disappearing lines a lot.
Yes.
So she goes into cities, you see snow on streets and streets disappearing, and very, very formal, graphic approach with people in them, you know, always. Like I said, she's not just taking a picture of a piece of architecture, she's making a very complicated design with the photograph, like you said, the small people, the fellow at the bottom spraying water, and the architecture. But she's doing that with every one. She's not just taking the overhead subway in Chicago going out of frame or going into frame in the middle of the frame. She's actually assembling other components in the picture to make them much more interesting. So, and I think that she does I love the fact that she, in those days, was using the receding lines that photography is so good at.
I don't know if I can make this point with any kind of clarity or comprehensibility or not, but I'll give it a shot. And that is that I was, as Lou was talking about it, and I was looking at this, I was thinking about anybody else goes with a camera over their shoulder to go to the shore for the day or something, and they take a picture of this. It just is a whole different world. It just is a remark, that's a snapshot, it's fine, but this is something else. There's weight and substance to this. I think one of the things that I'm struck by in her work that's so exciting is that she is thoroughly understanding the potential for something as what it becomes as a picture. So is she interested in the rock or the lawn or the actual building? Well, only as they become elements in what she designs or she makes into a picture that works, right? So this is sort of art above, snapshot kind of thing. And she's at a plane, a level where she's thoroughly understanding of what something like this can become as a photograph, a black and white photograph.
I think you said that very well.
Well, I probably said it before.
All right, Lou. Hey, Lou, so we're going to have one more image. You've talked about the different categories that she would take images in. Are there categories, or is there an image in a category that you would like to discuss that we have not spent much time with?
Let's just pick one out of go back the other way here. Say this, the right dead center and the gentleman.
Yeah. Tilted. Yeah.
Like I said, my initial years ago introduction was to her, when they first discovered and they started to one of the things that we as photographers, and I talk about the large world of photography, often gravitate towards portraits, and virtually all photographers do them. That's where I started. When I first got started, I did lots of portraits. It's part of what photography does well. But we have grown into the world of selfies and the ego that portraits, and so I've moved away from that. So my feeling is that when she that she does really wonderful portraits when she gets to this level, but she also does some stuff that it's just portraiture. The people are wonderful, but it's just portraiture. And I think she's stronger, believe it or not, when she goes in and makes these much more complex photographs. But the wonderful thing is that she actually confronts these people. Like we think of her as a solitary, lonely, we're putting all kinds of our own emotions, but she never showed her work. She isolated, she lived alone. She, photographed mostly alone. We don't find a lot of friends. At least that's what they're telling us when we're researching her.
Yeah.
And yet she's not unwilling to go up to a lot of these people and tell them, make them pose for her photographs.
Is this an image you think that she worked with him on, that she posed him? It feels a little bit like it's a captured moment to me.
He knows she's photographing him.
Okay. You know better than I.
No, you could be right, but I think, and if you look at a lot of them, that they know that she's photographing.
Absolutely, no doubt. We talked about the young boy in the image before,
right,
that she clearly was interacting with.
She's eye to eye and close up, quite often. And that was what I alluded to in the beginning when I was talking about how she's such an introvert, and yet I think she's driven by the picture, that she wants the picture. And so she overcomes, or she's familiar enough with that territory. And she's not a confronter. She's not somebody who threatens you as she's standing in front of you. And so that's helpful too. And she might say something like, "Can I take your picture?" We don't really know, but she's able to overcome her own shyness, presumably. Yes. To photograph people straight on.
Well, I'm gonna step way out on a limb here, but
go for it.
Oh, I love it. Bring it on.
Again, we're having the context of what time period she's photographing in. And in those days, it was much easier to photograph people. Yes. Portraits on the street. Absolutely. People were flattered. We didn't have this super you're going to use my picture on social media, or you're going to do something bad with my photograph. Yeah.
What are you doing that for?
A much simpler time. Photography was fascinating, so people didn't shy away from it like they do today. They were even to some degree flattered that you found them interesting to photograph. So we have to put that in context. I've been doing this so long that I know in my early days, walking down the street and taking pictures of people was much easier than it is today.
Me too, of course. Yeah.
A lot easier.
Yeah.
So that there's an unspoken contract between people who are posing and people who are photographing that often goes on, often without words. People know you're taking pictures of you and are giving you permission without speaking about it. Being able to take pictures. And also, here I'm going to step over the cliff and be chauvinistic as hell. But what happens is that women are often, especially in those days, given a lot more leeway than men.
And we haven't discussed that, but that's rare, isn't it?
That's true.
This is a woman doing this, and that is a special circumstance, and she's in a unique place to be not threatening, I think, particularly. A big guy, Gary Winogrand, on the street, in this kind of bullish way, the way he made pictures was like a hunter, right? She's not a hunter. You know, she's unassuming and not confrontational particularly. Doesn't look like she's a threat of any kind. And then it's the 50s. It's an age of innocence in terms of photography.
Exactly.
You know, all of the stuff that's happened hasn't happened yet. And all the difficulty on the street. I mean, being a street photographer now is something quite scary. Can be quite scary, you know.
Can be.
And particularly if you're getting close enough to get it done and be good at it. Right. So quick, take the picture. Somebody's aware of the path that you just photographed them. That could be something very confrontational and pretty nasty pretty quick.
And I hadn't thought about this. I'm going to let you go, Jeff, in just a second, but I hadn't thought about this until just now. Think about what she's wearing. The kind of little, simple little hat, simple little cloth coat, the simple little dress, the very unthreatening way. I mean, I don't know if she was conscious of that, but that might have been her normal thing, but certainly I think it might have played. Again, it was the 50s and it was easy. I think it was easier. It was easier for me. I didn't take pictures in the 50s, but I certainly took pictures in the 70s. And so, and it was much, much easier.
A different time, the golden age. Well, so we started the conversation with the question of, is Vivian Maier one of the greats? Is she in the pantheon of those people who are on the Mount Olympus of photographers? And I don't know that we answered that, and I think that's a question that will be out there. And I mean, that's an opinion question anyway. But here's what I've learned from the two of you, and for me, the whole reason for doing the Crit House is for me to learn from people who are smart like you about photography. And I have learned to appreciate elements of her photography that I wouldn't have without you pointing it out to me. So I thank you for your input and your thoughts and your expertise and joining us here on the Crit House. Do you have any final thoughts about Ms. Maier? Anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to add?
I'd just like to go to a slightly different area just quickly, and that is,
Please do.
We're doing something that you haven't done here before, and I appreciate being a part of it. I hope it is a vehicle by which you can do other masters crits, because it puts acknowledged, really wonderful photographers in the context of being talked about, and I think that's helpful for your audience and beneficial. Mr.
Jones?
I'm not sure that we answered your question. That was the first one. You came with a blockbuster question right from the beginning, but I think that we will be talking about, and you know, I just saw another article, a strange little article within the last few days about Vivian Maier, but I think that we will be talking about her for quite a bit more time, and I think that may answer your question in an oblique way. But if we talk about them, that's you good. Know, what do they say? I don't care what you say about me, just spell my name right.
Well, she is a fascinating character, and for me, a person who went through a good portion of my photographic life not having input or education, and kind of being in my own world. I feel a little kinship with her, so it was good to have the conversation. It was good to learn from her, and it was good to learn from you. And everyone, thanks you for watching the Crit House. And Lou Jones, Neal Rantoul, thank you for joining us on the Crit House.